Hello and welcome to Main Mother Matriarch. My guest today is Joyce Benenson, lecturer in Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University and the author of Warriors and Worriers, The Survival of the Sexes. We spoke about boys and men, why even very young boys are often obsessed with enemies, with superheroes, weapons, everything else to do with warfare, and how psychological sex differences are linked to the male urge towards violence and towards defense of the community. We also spoke about chimpanzee warfare, sports as a proxy for warfare, and the purpose of hazing rituals in masculine institutions. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you find the conversation as interesting as I did. Joyce, I really want to talk today about sex differences between children in general, but I'm particularly interested in boys for selfish reasons because I have two little boys. I have an almost 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And the section in Warriors and Worriers where you write about little boys' play, I so enjoyed, and it rang so true. And I wonder if you could start by explaining why boys are so obsessed with enemies and with superheroes in a way that girls generally aren't.
Okay, so I don't know the reasons. I can speculate. That's all I can do. And certainly around the world and in one of our two closest living genetic relatives, chimpanzees, intergroup aggression is a major part of what males go through. And maybe a few females would do it, but it's really rare. So if you're going to end up as an adolescent or an adult engaging in this intergroup aggression and lethal intergroup aggression, obviously it would make sense from a developmental perspective that you learn what's involved with this over time. One thing that is the way I try to think about it is boys they'll tell their stories, they'll put on their costumes, they'll come up with things that don't even exist, their imaginations. They want to read books about this in a way that girls just really aren't interested. It's boring. So the idea from my perspective is somehow we have evolved so that being part of a group, being part of a hierarchy, so the superhero is really good and the enemy is the worst and is outgroup, being part of the things that I see boys do is leading to the culmination of intergroup warfare, really. And that's a part of what males are expected to engage in. That's a part of what excites males. Certainly, if you look across cultures, and as far as I know, every culture, you have this in this form of sports, and it's been shown for millennia that you have males, I would say, simulating warfare by engaging in team sports with all the elements I just described. We have the enemy, which is whatever's the name of the team in their colors or whatever it is. And we have the in-group. And the in-group has better and worse players, and it's a group and all the kinds of things that would lead to winning and surviving, because it makes such an enormous difference for your community, obviously, if you can be victorious over the other community. So in the end, if you buy the evolutionary argument, and I really do, that part of the reason humans have evolved to be the way we are is because some groups prevailed over other groups. And it may sound, not very kindly or considerate from me, but I think that is evolution. And so what you have is some groups are just better than other groups. And part of being nice is being nice to your team members and not the other team members. And part of having, this superhero identity is protecting your team. So it is really, it sounds very individualistic, but in fact, you are there to protect your team, your community, your group, whatever it is. And that's like a wonderful feeling, I would say, even at age 4, right, or 3. And the other team has to be clearly demarcated as the enemy. And a lot of time spent figuring out how to destroy them. And it's survival. It's basic survival. So to me, that's how I've put it into my mind. And it's certainly with non-human primates, chimpanzees, not the other one, bonobo, that's clearly similarly related to us. But nonetheless, chimpanzees, I find a much better model for humans because there's so many things that are more similar about chimpanzees to humans as opposed to bonobos. So to me, that's what it is. It makes sense for anything that is important for adulthood, that you shouldn't just de novo develop it when you're 18, but in fact, that you should be practicing all the different stages of figuring out how to be a successful warrior in a team.
My 4-year-old recently overheard an adult conversation about Vladimir Putin, and
Oh,
all that he gathered from this conversation was that this was like a bad man, and it really preoccupied him, and he spent days afterwards talking about this bad man who, and then he came up with this idea, and I was just saying, he lives a long way away, darling. You don't need to worry about this, whatever. I was kind of doing the maternal talking him down, but he wouldn't let go of it, and eventually said, "Mummy, I have an idea. A burglar should kill him." Because he also knows that
perfect.
burglars are bad. Yeah, so he basically like invented a hitman from first principles,
That
age
is
4.
so creative and so perfect. And I remember I have a much older son, and he was that age when the Iraq War was being considered in the United States and Britain against
Hmm.
Iraq. And I said, I really was against it. I thought it was awful. He said, no, we absolutely have to fight. And in the bathtub, we used to have actually screaming arguments where he would start yelling at me because he thought we should absolutely go after Iraq. I don't think he even knew much about, I assume not, about this exact situation, but he thought a war with Iraq would be just fabulous. And I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe I was dealing with
Yeah.
this when I was so young. I had no preparation.
Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, as you write, they've got this mental priming to see enemies and to really focus all of their thought and energy and social effort towards fighting enemies, even little boys who still have cuddlies in their beds and everything, who are
Exactly.
otherwise,
That's what's so amazing.
yeah, they're sweet and sensitive, but they're already, yes, becoming warlike in their psychology. It is slightly, yeah. This question about so I guess there are two aspects to this male warlike psychology. One is the in-group is favoring the in-group and is building coalitions with other men, and some of that comes from play fighting as a child and forming very strong male friendships and so on, right? And then the other aspect to it is out-group hostility. So this is focusing on the enemy and yes, your buddies against them. But of course, who the in-group is and who the out-group is context dependent. How do boys learn that? How do they? I mean, clearly my son picked up the fact just from this brief adult conversation that Vladimir Putin was an enemy. Um, but we obviously don't live in the ancestral environment anymore. And so working out who is worthy of that designation is much more difficult. What do you think goes on in little boys' brains when they're trying to figure out this question?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, obviously, I think it's very easy in all of our brains to divide people into good people and bad people, which to me is a big problem because in most cases, that's just not true. But I think, with boys, I guess what hits me the most is that they're incredibly flexible in this. So that if
Mm,
suddenly Putin decided to be a friend of the United States, he would not harbor any grudges. And this I just find amazing because
yeah,
I find that boys are so flexible and they'll forgive and they'll forget. And, I know of young men who have been stabbed by one of their friends. These are, people from tough environments and almost died. And nevertheless, when that, friend apologized, they got back together and now they're good friends again. And I thought, I don't really think that a woman could do that where you almost died and you were almost killed and this person did it to you and you could actually want to have anything to do with another woman. We'll do it with a man, but I'm talking about with another woman. And you have these male bonds that I find just hard to understand from a female emotional perspective, but that I have now watched over and over again. So when you say, how do you figure it out? It's a contextual determination where everybody is agreeing this one is acting like the bad man. Really, I do think it's like that. It's not rational. It's just we've decided these are the bad ones now, and we are, of course, always are the good ones, always, right? And so therefore, that's who we go after now. But things can change, alliances can change. I look at Trump and Musk, and they were together, then they had this big falling out, and I could see it totally going either way. So they said horrible things to each other, things that would be the end of my relationship with someone, because they were so personal and so cruel. But no, I could see if for whatever reason they needed to work together again, they come back together. So I'm just generalizing this to groups as well. And I find that a lot of diplomacy has to do with, in a way, gritting your teeth and saying, okay, but I need something from this group or this individual. And so I'm going to overcome whatever negative events happened in the past. And now they're on my side. And I do find this fluidity much more common amongst boys and men versus girls and women. And one example is if you're talking about observing kids, because I spend a lot of my time observing kids on the playground, and Janet Lever has wonderful references to this. And a lot of what boys want to do is fight and fight and fight over rules. They're not even necessary rough and tumble play, not even physical aggression, but fight and be serious. And then, yeah, okay, now you won, I lost. Okay, you're right. Or everybody agrees with you and not me, and then forget about it. And so again, I'm just talking about the fluidity, the flexibility, the ability to say who is an enemy. It depends on today.
Yeah. Is that true for chimpanzees wage war, right?
Yes. Well, it depends. I can define it for you.
Please do. Yeah.
So basically what chimpanzees will do, primarily males, sometimes there'll be a female, oftentimes maybe a sterile female will join them, but they don't don military uniforms. But other than that, they walk single file, really, really silently, looking on their periphery for any members of their neighboring communities. And there's always hostile relations. And so there's 2 points to that. One is to defend and show that they are a group and nobody can encroach on my territory. But the more seemingly common occurrence is to actually look to take out members of the neighboring community. At first, nobody could understand why on earth. When Jane Goodall first saw this, she was appalled. I mean, what can you say? It was appalling because they killed other members in a brutal fashion of a neighboring community. And so the question is, what on earth would be the advantage of doing that? Because you might get hurt yourself. And there were several things that came out of that. One is it expands your territory. So if you can murder, one after another, males in particular, sometimes infants, particularly if they're male, but you can expand your territory. And that means your genes get passed on to the next generation more commonly or more likely to be passed on because you can have more fruiting trees. The females in your community have more space, right? The infants have more protection because there's a bigger no man's land around your community. There's all kinds of survival benefits and then reproductive benefits to being able to do that. But the other part of it is the fact that they really are very careful to not get hurt themselves. So in some ways, they're superior to humans in that they calculate a ratio that most men will tell you if you just ask them, but they don't always follow. And that is at least 3-to-1 and oftentimes higher ratios, but a minimum of 3-to-1 to take out, to kill, to murder another male. And so that makes total sense. Like, how many would you need? Minimal. Well, you want to make sure that the hands, the arms are paralyzed, and you want to make sure the body is paralyzed. And then, so you have somebody paralyzing the arms and somebody paralyzing the body, and then somebody without any weapons jumping up and down on the face, on the chest, on the genitals, and just murdering, an individual. And so they've seen this now, and it's very mathematical in terms of ratios. It's, calculated so that the attacking group doesn't get hurt, and it happens over and over and over again. And I guess that really changed my life when I read about that in Jane Goodall's book in 1986. It was like, wow, this looks so similar to what we do. Now, obviously, warfare usually involves two sides, and so it's not calculated the ratio, but obviously the victor usually has just more men. That's it. Now we have more weapons and the more technologically advanced weapons and all kinds of things. But number one thing without technology is just more. And so being able to get along with males, being able to see them as on your side and clearly demarcate the other side, the enemy, is a critical thing for a chimpanzee. And now that I've learned more about other mammals as well, they don't have as clearly the warfare, but this territoriality, this idea of separating in group, out group, the idea of males taking, the front row seats to this attack and protecting the females, it's very common. So now we're talking about really ancient, not 6 or 7 million years ago, but, many, maybe 100 million years ago of early mammals and farther, where territoriality, distinctions between in and out group, they're there. And that's part of who we are. And people like to say not true, but it's so clear. And a lot of people like to say, oh, no, it can't be true. We're really nice and good. And I don't know what that means, because from an evolutionary perspective, do we survive and do we pass on our genes is really all that counts. How we do that, and whether you happen to think it's moral or nice or not, is irrelevant.
Do chimpanzees take the females from other groups as?
Okay, so that depends, and I think sometimes they actually will kill another female. Of course, another female with an infant hurts one's own females because they eat more. But oftentimes they will expand their territory and leave some of the females alive because they are mating, right? They're mates, they're future mates. So, this happens also in, some South American tribes where males will do the same thing and they'll murder the men and take the women, and happens in Africa. So it's like it happens horribly all over the world. And rape is a very common instrument of warfare, both to intimidate the other side, but also sometimes to inseminate the other side.
This episode is sponsored by Relay, one of those brands that's just such a perfect fit with MMM. I think what they're doing is excellent. Relay is an app that helps people stop using porn. And let's be honest, porn is basically everywhere on the internet. Most men see it first as teenagers. It quietly becomes part of life. But over time, it leaves a mark. You're more distracted, less present, less patient. It eats away at integrity, makes secrecy feel normal, and creates distance in your relationships. Many men feel stuck in the cycle, ashamed, frustrated, and wondering if change is even possible. That's where Relay comes in. It's therapist accredited and built on solid therapeutic principles, but the real difference is that you're no longer fighting alone. Relay places you in a private group with other men on the same journey, giving you daily accountability, encouragement, and tools to handle triggers whenever they pop up. You can stay totally anonymous while getting the real support you need to build a life of integrity. It's about becoming the husband, the father, the man that you were meant to be. Relay has already transformed the lives of thousands of men and the lives of their partners. Don't let the pattern continue. You don't have to stay stuck. Go to joinrelay.app/Maiden and use the code Louise, that's all capital letters Louise, to try it out for free. That's joinrelay.app/Maiden. Do chimpanzees, they obviously don't have language like we do, and they don't have tools like we do, but do they do the same sort of coalition building and male intersexual behavior being really orientated towards war? Do we observe that?
Okay, so they certainly engage in a lot of coalitions, and male coalitions are a major part of chimpanzee society. So some males have very preferred friends. They groom a lot. But you also see these remarkable findings from Liran Samuni, and she basically shows that prior to beginning a raid on another community, the males will groom one another, they'll stay close to each other, and you can actually measure increases in oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone. It goes up prior to a raid, as opposed to if the males are just there, but they're not going to go on a raid. It also goes up prior to hunting. So males work together. They know who's good at different activities. You can actually measure the fact that they are bonding in this way. And of course, then they're off and they're very silently engaged in a patrol, sort of like the army, around the territory, both for defense and also for offense.
Do they do play fighting?
Oh, Play fighting. Oh, so the juveniles. Okay. So that's
Yeah.
really interesting. 'Cause I don't know. Juveniles have oftentimes not been studied. There's wonderful work by Chris Sabi that shows from very early on in infancy and the juvenile period, males are much more likely to be attracted to adult males. So we're talking about juvenile males, little ones, right? They're adorable. The males really are interested in the adult males when they're fighting, and they
Mm.
are aggressive towards anyone much more than the females are. And this is lovely because you can't argue too much that it's certainly not socialized by anything in our society. So you have these males who just love aggression. And what happens is that the aggression is reciprocated. And so you get play or maybe more serious fighting. Obviously, the chimpanzees are careful with, they know that someone's much littler than them. They know they're vulnerable, so they're careful not to hurt them. But it can be serious aggression in terms of it's not just for play and they'll swat each other or whatever. And males invite that much more than female juveniles. And it's a huge difference. And what happens is it just ratchets up, and you get then males being really attracted to adult males when they're fighting, then going over to the males and, socking them or whatever. And then it's being reciprocated by the adult males who don't want that. And then, but it's attractive at the same time. And so you get this learning of aggression, but it starts with the juveniles themselves, which is to me just fascinating.
Going back to human children, so we obviously do a lot of play fighting. My children already play fighting. My youngest isn't even one yet, and he's already
Yes.
kind of getting involved. Yeah, he's learned that. And I read you saying this. They'll do this at the end of infancy, even. And I thought, yeah, wow, they really will. What other things do little boys do to train themselves to be warriors?
Okay. So I have to say that I have never met a little boy who doesn't love weapons. So this to me is just amazing because, my son was fairly shy and certainly not super aggressive at all. But his most favorite things in the whole world were sticks, guns, spears, machetes, trebuchets, things I'd never heard of that I learned the names of. These weapons, they were usually long and could be thrust in some way or other, or they were guns, which, we didn't have them in the house, but he loved these things. When we were near a gun manufacturer, he didn't want to go to a museum. He wanted to go visit the gun manufacturer. I could not believe it. I have to say, it was so shocking for me, but that is something that I've seen. I did a study in Britain when I lived there, and I, asked boys and girls, what's your favorite thing to play with? And I showed them these action men, and, by far it was the ones that are engaged in aggression. And if they had a weapon, so much the better. And it's just a fascinating thing to me, the idea of what I call propulsion or forward movement, where you can actually hit somebody and hurt them potentially, being so interesting. I would say to boys by 12 months of age that you can really see these sex differences early on. So what could be better for winning a war than picking up something? And this is of course more human-like because chimpanzees don't do that as much. I think they've been shown once in a while to hit someone with a stick, but this is a very human-like, very large brain way of thinking. But to think that little boys love it. In simple societies such as the Hadza, Tanzania, and so forth, they give boys weapons, real weapons, by 2 to 3 years of age. I mean, they're small, they're made so they can grasp them for little hands, but they use them. They'll kill animals and so forth. They don't give them to the girls. Now you can say, oh, well, see, that's socialization. And it may well be. I can't argue with that. But my guess is the girls are not so interested in that because the girls are doing other things. They are, taking care of things that their mother does, pretend cooking, or maybe doing a little real cooking and maybe a little weaving, and certainly very interested in infants younger than themselves. But the boys hunting starts literally at age 2. And it really surprises me how early that comes online, and that they can kill small animals, and that they are given the weapons and they use them. So it's a thrill for those little boys to have weapons. And one of the things I always, people have said to me in a very cruel way, they said, how can you possibly say that we should give little boys weapons? And I said, well, if you want to entertain them and if you want them to be interested in a particular activity, that's one way to engage their interest, because I have never met one who doesn't find that just so entrancing.
My eldest got a wooden sword at some point. I think I didn't buy it for him. I don't know. This wooden sword entered the house, and he immediately started like viciously attacking my dad as
Okay.
part of play fighting. And so we did have to say, okay, you can use a sword, but only if your grandfather also has a shield. That has to be the rule, because otherwise it's just too likely to result in injury. Because they really, I mean, yeah, they really go for it, don't they?
It's
It's quite something.
incredible. It is incredible.
Yeah.
The problem is the way we set up, early childhood or preschool, whatever you want to call it, daycare centers, is to make sure, you don't see that. And so, but that's then obfuscating something that is natural. And so people don't want to talk about it, but it is a part of what boys do and what boys love. And so that building to being a full blown warrior is starting at age 1.
But it is moderated by environment, right? So when you, as we do, live in very peaceful societies where the boys aren't seeing that kind of warfare, they are less aggressive, right? Like their early childhood experiences do affect how warlike they are.
Oh, absolutely. But what I would see, or take away from what you're saying, is you always adapt to the environment that you see. And, if you can't use those particular interests, then you don't, or you take some kind of fencing class, or right, or you go and do martial arts, or you go. So it's not that it's not there. It's just put in a way that's acceptable to society. Certainly, there's a lot of boys who engage in all these kinds of sports in which you can do these things and engage, even throwing a ball, right? With one hand, the way boys throw, right, is how you
Like a
would,
spear.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
So if you're asking me, yeah, is the murder rate much higher in some places than other? Yeah. I mean, we're talking about huge, right, factors of differences in murder. No question. So it is not acceptable to murder, and a lot of things have to go wrong in a peaceful society for you to do that. But to me, that's, obviously, if you're a clinician or you're a public policy person, this is obvious, all that counts. But to me, looking at the underlying psychology of it, it's all there, and outlets are found for it, and boys are practicing these types of things because they like it. They really enjoy the motions. They enjoy dividing into good and bad groups. They enjoy the technical prowess involved in being good at this, and they enjoy tools. And tools are just like fabulous. And sports have all their different kinds of tools.
You write about a theory as to why you often see more aggression among boys who've been raised by single mothers.
Uh,
That do you want to explain this theory in terms of the aggression development?
No, I have to say I don't, right? I really don't understand, I really don't know much about this. I mean, I do
Mm-hmm.
think that older men, and it doesn't have to be a father, but older men put downward pressure on boys to control things. And I think women have a much harder time. And part of it is eventually a boy becomes big enough that he could hurt his mother. And so by adolescence, you get in chimpanzee communities, and every single chimpanzee male will dominate every single adult female who they're many years older than them. And I think that's what happened to some extent when in adolescence, what males, boys who are becoming men do that to their mothers and other women. So that's a big problem. Having men around then, I think, is absolutely essential. And certainly the military and religion, when there's men involved, and the home and the family and the community and so forth, I think makes a huge difference to containing this actually acting out of the aggression or providing alternate outlets so that, whatever it is, the sports and so forth, and you see all these men who are coaching and using the same behaviors, the tools, techniques, skills, whatever, you get this outlet for doing it. And that's much more pro-social and much more where you can contribute to society as opposed to destroy it. But that I think men have a stronger role in that than women. Because really, most women I know are not so interested in what we're talking about. Meaning, other than if you have little boys or you happen to be a researcher who observes this, right? It's like, no, I don't want to really spend my time going and, shooting at the range. Yes, there are some women who do it, but if I have my choice, that's really going to be off my list. It's not even going to be low ranked on the list of shooting or throwing things or whatever. Maybe I'll do some archery at camp if I have to, and it might be a little bit fun. And certainly darts, not so bad, right? But these are really like, as long as the dart doesn't really have a sharp point and I couldn't, hurt anyone. And it's just the motion, the outcome of it, the camaraderie surrounding it, I think is totally different. But men appreciate it. And I think, and that's the only thing I would say in reference to that, it makes it really hard for a young boy growing up without men. And it doesn't have to be a father, but men really involved in his life and giving him another outlet. And my sense, and this is, again, I'm not a clinician at all, so I'm not referring to the clinical literature, but my sense is it's very rough for a boy to grow up with no male adults around. And then his natural proclivities to get involved with peers, which I think males do even more than females do. And then what do the peers want to do? Well, they want to do the same thing. So what do they want to do? Well, then they get into natural conflicts and how much fun, right? Oh, we have a real group here and you have a group, and gosh, we're going to try to hurt your group because we're the good guys and you're the bad guys, right out of, in the old days, what they call cowboys and Indians in America, whatever they want to call it. Then they create all these games, which would be in where a more kind of structured environment with men would be team sports, now becomes, spontaneous on the street, very much similar in all the things I've described, but nonetheless out of control sometimes. And I think it's very hard for someone who's not a male who has some impact on this boy's life to stop it. And that's, I think, the best I can do to address that.
Is it possible as well that the boys are getting cues from their environment? So if they're growing up in conditions of poverty, stress, the adults are clearly distracted, so it's partly, of course, that they're then spending more time with male peers and you get a bit of a Lord of the Flies experience.
Exactly.
But also maybe it's that cues that actually things are rough, like we need to be ready for whatever comes at us, right? Which in a more peaceable setting, they might not get those cues.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question. I think that's really clear. And, whatever society you go to, and there's all kinds of different ones throughout the world where there are large differences in how likely it is you're going to have gang warfare, you're going to have adult males fighting each other, you're going to have war going on. And we can think of top of our heads where this is going on. I think I read recently there's like 100 active wars going on right now around our world, and almost all of the people involved are men. So that's like so obviously a part of who we are. My students hate when I say this. They actually get really upset. But I think it's absurd to think that isn't the case. But if you're talking about developmentally, absolutely, you grow up in an environment and you see that if you don't have a gun or you don't have a weapon and you don't have peers who are going to defend you, then you might die because there are people dying around you. So, of course, I think we're very, very flexible. I think you can change. I always say if somebody's having a hard time, no matter what it is when they're growing up, put them in a new environment. And I say that for boys and girls. Just pick them up, take them out of that school or that neighborhood or whatever. As long as you have the flexibility to do that, you will change what is rewarded in the environment. So yeah, I absolutely, I don't think there's any way I would say that what you actually end up doing is a genetic or biological phenomena. It's what I'm talking about, the proclivities.
This is why I find the evolutionary position more plausible than the hard socialization theory position, because it's nature and nurture, whereas actually the hard socialization theory is just no, it's 100% nurture. It's a much more extreme position, which doesn't really work when you look at, say, chimpanzees, or you look at other times and places where you're seeing the same patterns arise and you think, what are the chances,
Yeah, I mean, to me, the three sources of data are the developmental data, and that's how I started, because I wanted to see what are kind of the biological predispositions you could see early on. The non-human data, which also really interests me, and one thing I just read about, because I haven't done it myself, is the anthropological data. So if I say there's 100 wars going on, and it's true right now in supposedly our civilized society, right, enormous numbers of people are dying every day in wars, and we don't think about it because it's kind of overwhelming, but it is a part of who we are. And the fact that it's so widespread, to me, all these three pieces of evidence, developmental, phylogenetic, and cross-cultural, it's very hard to say that war isn't in our DNA.
This is not the end of the episode. Actually, we're only halfway through, but the rest of the show is behind paywall. In the extended version, Joyce and I spoke about how psychological sex differences play out in the modern world. So why even very young boys will tend to be assertive, even dominant towards little girls of the same age, even when they're the same height and weight, pretty much. Why boys are much more reckless than girls and end up in hospital much more frequently as a result. Why traditionally male professions like policing and firefighting in the military used to, they're often not now, rely on very macho rituals like banter and hazing, and what purpose this serves in reinforcing male camaraderie. While you can, of course, listen to MMM wherever you get your podcasts, the true home of the show is to be found at louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can find not only the extended version of this episode, but also the extended versions of hundreds of MMM podcasts, plus the weekly bonus episodes I record with other Substackers, including Rob Henderson, Megan Murphy, Nina Power, Mary Harrington, Ed West, Freya India, and more. This is a listener-supported podcast. I'm utterly reliant on paid subscribers to produce the show and keep the lights on. If you find Maiden Mother Matriarch valuable, the most helpful possible thing that you can do is go to louiseperry.substack.com and sign up to become a paid subscriber for either $8 a month or $79 a year. Without paid subscribers, I really wouldn't be able to produce the podcast. So if you're willing to join their ranks, this is the key way that you can support me and support the show. Thank you.